Hello, this is Steve Kubby, and I'd like to welcome you to part 2 of our interview with Steve Sarich, the Seattle medical marijuana activist, who will explain today what the nuance, what the consequences are of the new laws in Washington in respect to driving under the influence, being caught with marijuana in your car, and being charged just for possession in your car with driving under the influence, a more serious crime. Well, Steve, with all the new laws being implemented, what can you tell us about how we can be safe and avoid arrest and prosecution for driving under the influence?
Drunk driving implies impairment. Drugged driving is defined entirely different. Drug driving has a very distinct definition, and drugged driving is about catching people with a measurable amount of an illegal drug in their system. It has no relationship to impairment. It does not require that you prove impairment. In fact, in court, if you have that drug in your system at a particular level, you cannot even state in court or make the argument that you weren't impaired, because it doesn't make any difference.
Has there been any consideration when it comes to drugged driving versus impaired driving?
We're not supposed to have drugged driving laws in the state of Washington, and we shouldn't have a drugged driving law by definition in Washington state, because marijuana or cannabis is now not an illegal drug on Washington state books. Instead of getting rid of the per se DUID or looking at it to determine if 5 nanograms was in fact a measure of impairment, they actually added 3 new per se DUIDs, and again didn't bother to look at one single study as to whether or not 5 nanograms was a level of impairment or not. They added a boating DUID, and they added a really heinous new DUID. Well, they added one for truck drivers, okay? So now truck drivers who take Marinol and can use Marinol legally according to the Federal Department of Transportation can use it everywhere except if they drive through the state of Washington, okay? That is the only state they cannot use Marinol in, even though the Federal Department of Transportation will not pull their licenses and will not do anything to them if they're using Marinol. But they added a particularly nasty increase in penalties, and that is for driving with your children in the car. You now have an enhancement for each child you have in the car, and that's to a $1,000 to $5,000 additional penalty per child, an additional criminal charge. Now you're going to get one more charge, which is really going to ruin your life, because you're going to get a reckless endangerment charge for having those 2 kids in your car when you were legally stoned and you weren't impaired at all.
What do you want patients to know about how to handle themselves when confronted with law enforcement in Washington state?
I can keep about 95% of the patients from ever getting a DUI in the first place, but one of the things I teach in the class, first thing, do not take the field sobriety test. Most people think you have to take that test. You do not have to take it. You should not take it. There's no scientific basis for that test, and you don't know the game that is the standardized field sobriety test. It is not part of implied consent. There is no penalty for not taking it. It's not like not taking a breathalyzer. If you don't take the field sobriety test and then they take your breath or they take your blood, then you've given them, if you take that test, you've given them probable cause to take your blood or your breath. If you don't take that test, and then if you don't take the field sobriety test, and then they take your bodily fluids, you can get those thrown out in court later. The other thing you don't do, and this is going to happen more with the per se DUIDs, if they think if it's a cannabis-related driving incident, they will put you in front of a DRE who's had the same training as I've had, and you do not take that examination either, because that's an even less scientific test, and again, it's completely optional, and you will hardly ever be able to beat a DRE examination. It's stacked against you right from the very beginning.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for that report from Seattle, And this has been Steve Kubby with Kubby TV. You can catch us on Kubby TV, Pot TV, Cannabis Culture website, and other premium sites. In the meantime, have a 420 day.
It's the proximity of what I hope to be. The weight so heavy where I stand. The indecision builds within my twisted sense of self.